It's both insightful and thought-provoking, and I look forward to your questions at the end. We will be covering a lot of material today, and you can expect to gain some important insights from this webinar. As you can see from this brief bio, I've had 30-plus years of international consulting experience, mainly with senior executive teams, medium to large organizations. To name a few: Ford, British Telecom, Bell Atlantic, General Dynamics, even the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, Jaguar, the retailer Saks Fifth Avenue, Continental Airlines, Frito-Lay, Pepsi-Cola, McDonald's, and quite a few others. It's been a fun ride. One of the key takeaways from today's webinar will be the fact that this fast break process for all industry sectors. This picture pretty much tells the entire story. So let's get right to some of the facts, and these facts may surprise you. Most strategies fail. As you can see on the page, there's quite a few statistics here. And there are many other studies confirming the failure of most strategies, but I think you get the point. Now, the question most of us should be asking is, what causes this poor track record when millions are often spent on top consultants and market research to come up with a competitive strategy? Well, it's not lack of money or poor analytics. Most often, the cause is very simple: poor execution. There is some good news, however. You can significantly increase the probability of successful strategy execution by managing your strategy with alignment, focus, discipline, and the thing we're going to talk about today, a robust methodology or a business process. I'm confident when I say that most executives have a poor understanding of what strategy really is. For those of you who are curious about really understanding strategy, I urge you to purchase and read this little book by Professor Richard Rummelt of the Anderson Business School at the University of California, Los Angeles. To me, this is perhaps the most comprehensive and useful introduction to strategy. And he makes a great point in his book. What he basically says is that strategy and action must go together. They are one and the same. And in my book, FASTBREAK, I use this phrase: there is no strategy without execution. In other words, all you have is PowerPoint slides, charts, and graphs, but very little results. So what we're going to talk about today is, how do we take it from strategy to results? What sort of process is required? Let's take a moment to look at one company that has executed on their strategy extremely well. My book covers quite a few companies: Ford, Zappos, Select Comfort Mattresses, but I'm going to focus just for the next couple slides on the turnaround of Continental Airlines, which happened in 1994. If you look on the left-hand side of this slide, I believe you're going to see some facts that are fairly depressing, and they were certainly fairly depressing to the folks at Continental in 1994. In fact, there weren't many in the airline industry who gave Continental any chance of survival. As you can see, it was facing its third bankruptcy in 10 years, $2.5 billion in default. At the very bottom, you can see, I think, the worst statistic: 10 CEOs in 10 years. And yet here's the situation just a few years later. They became profitable in 1 year, voted Global Airline of the Year in '96, and actually have done extremely well since that time. With a joined-up strategy, an aligned leadership team, and a robust execution process, Continental not only survived, but thrived and became one of the most admired airlines for the next 15 years. But unfortunately, there are more stories of failed strategies than there are of successful ones. So let's take a look at the barriers to effective strategy execution. I'm going to go through these one by one and give you just a little bit of annotation on each one. These are mostly things that people don't see. They're usually invisible inside of an organization. Most people believe that strategies fail due to lack of money. Well, here are some of the barriers that are extremely strong and cause poor strategy execution. Number one, execution is usually an afterthought rather than an integral part of the strategy formulation. Too often a strategy is formulated, everybody gets excited, they write it down, they make the PowerPoint slides, and then comes the realization that, oops, now we have to implement it. So the two things from the beginning are disconnected. Second barrier, lack of accountability. I've read hundreds of strategy documents and very few of them pinpoint who exactly is accountable for what strategic initiative in what part of the strategy. And I think, as every business executive now knows, if everyone's accountable, then no one's accountable. The third barrier has to do with lack of employee understanding. There's some great statistics on employee engagement, or I should say lack of employee engagement. This one, less than 14% of employees understand the strategy. If we're going to execute a competitive strategy, employees must be engaged, fully engaged. They're closest to the customer usually, or closest to the product. And yet with so few employees understanding what the strategy is and how their job makes a difference, it's very difficult to get them fully engaged, and as a result, it's very difficult to execute on the strategy. Number four, too many business initiatives are not tied to the overall strategy, wasting valuable resources on what I call disconnected initiatives. With so many initiatives going on at the same time, and with a large percentage of them not connected to the business strategy, the situation inside can get very hectic and chaotic. Lots of activity, but little forward movement. We did a study several years ago in a couple of organizations looking at all the initiatives that were being funded inside that company. And we came up with a startling conclusion that approximately 30% of them have no connection to the strategic goals whatsoever. Wasted resources, wasted time, wasted energy. The opportunity is to reduce the number of initiatives and get them all lined up so that we can have an overall strategic direction for the organization. Let's continue on some of the barriers. Number 5 has to do with corporate culture. Too often, corporate culture acts as a barrier to the teamwork, openness, and innovation required for strategy execution. Let me give you a brief illustration of what I mean by corporate culture being a barrier. The ideal situation is to get our strategy, structure, and culture aligned. In other words, strategy is where we're going, structure is how we're organized, and culture are the rules and regulations and ways we go about delivering on our strategy. Once that's aligned, the organization can work very, very effectively. It's great until the world begins to change, and when there's global forces coming into play, new competitors, new regulations, or new technology, it often requires us to develop a new strategy and to reorganize. And many companies go about this process quite effectively. The problem is they often forget to shift the culture as well, and the culture begins to act like an anchor. It's tough to implement or execute a new strategy when you've got an old culture that has habits and beliefs and customs of doing things in a certain way. Monopoly to a competitive organization is a great example of this when the Bell companies broke up in 1984. So the challenge is to not only develop a new strategy and structure, but we also need to shift the culture as well. And if we don't go about that in a diligent way, then culture can act as a barrier to strategy execution. Let's keep going here. Unfortunately, there are quite a few barriers to effective strategy execution. Number 6, management discipline and adequate governance is lacking, allowing day-to-day operating problems to take up valuable time. Most strategy review meetings I've ever been to are quickly hijacked by day-to-day operating problems, so that the time that should be spent managing and governing the forward movement of the strategy is actually spent solving day-to-day operating problems. Unhappy customer complaints, late schedules, cost overruns. The strategy in moving the company forward often takes a backseat to today's problems, and as a result, the strategy stalls. Strategy is often developed by outside consultants and delivered in big binders with little management ownership and commitment. By this I mean the reality is that unless the senior executives and the middle management are actively engaged in developing their own strategy and debating and arguing and discussing and solving the strategic issues that are going to move them forward, there's actually little understanding and ownership and commitment of the process. Ownership and commitment of a strategy comes from the hard work of building the strategy yourself and having the debates, not having some high-priced outside consultant to develop it for us. And last is perhaps one of the biggest barriers. I call it silo focus. And what I mean by that is a strategy gets quickly broken up into pieces that are aligned with the functions or departments. HR gets the people stuff, engineering gets the product stuff, marketing gets the customer stuff, on and on. Sounds great, sounds efficient. However, there's little teamwork on moving the overall strategy forward, since everyone tends to get very focused on their department goals. In fact, more focused on their department goals than they are on the overall strategy, which often leads to conflict between executives over budgets and resources. And it's tough to deliver a strategy when there's internal fighting over budgets and resources. Here's an example of what I mean. It's usually the chief executive is one of the few who has the entire enterprise focus, and everybody else is focused on their departments or their functions, or their silos. I'm recommending that we change the roles of the CEO and the senior team to an enterprise focus. That is, their job now becomes the delivery of the strategy, and as a result, barriers are more easily overcome since this team has the authority to implement change and move around assets to more effectively drive the strategy. That allows the next level of management to step up and focus on delivering operational requirements, departmental or functional objectives. It becomes a shift of how we manage and run our business. So in summary, I think you can see there are considerable barriers to effective strategy execution. Overcoming these formidable barriers to strategy execution requires a robust business process. And I'm going to introduce you to one that we've created called the Line of Sight Strategy Execution Roadmap. Before I do that, let me give you just a short study that was done a few years ago, comparing those organizations with a formal strategy execution process versus those who don't. And I think you can see the dramatic results. For those who had a formal execution process in place, 70% of those said that they got breakthrough results and performed better. So I think there's a great value in having a strategy execution process. So let me introduce you to one. In summary, effective strategy execution requires an integrated organizational approach, as we've talked about, combined of a joined-up strategy, cohesive leadership team, and a robust process. And here's where we're going to focus the rest of this webinar on, a robust process. So imagine this. What if you could have your entire strategy on a single page and use it to manage the strategy execution process effectively? So let's look at a new and extremely effective strategy execution process. We call it the Line of Sight Strategy Execution Roadmap. And I'm going to quickly walk you through how this Line of Sight roadmap is constructed and how it's used to significantly improve the probability of successful strategy execution. So let's start at the beginning with what I call the strategy building blocks. In other words, the foundation behind your strategic vision. If this work is not done well or thoroughly, then the entire strategy itself will be weak. I think you can visualize a large building with a weak foundation. It's just not going to last. And as you can see, there are a variety of different elements required to these building blocks. These are a few that we recommend that the senior team get together and collectively discuss and debate. Market dynamics, making sure they understand their cultural strengths and weaknesses, taking a look at what their internal competitive advantages are. What is their strategic approach? Is it going to be cost? Is it going to be distribution? Is it going to be technology-based? What are the limiting factors? In other words, what are the barriers to sustainability? A good question that every senior team should ask themselves is, what one thing would put us out of business in 3 years? What do we have to guard against? What could be a limiting factor? Also, I believe that one of the fundamental strategy building blocks is the alignment and cohesion of this leadership team. In other words, do their behaviors and practices match with the strategic outcomes and the strategic needs of the organization? Once these building blocks are debated and discussed, it's very easy then to move on to developing your strategic vision. In this case, we use some terms called the strategic intent. In other words, where do we want to be in 2 to 3 to 5 years? And the strategic imperatives. You might call these critical success factors, but these are the 2 or 3 things that must be accomplished in order for us to deliver on our strategic vision. For example, in the case of Continental Airlines, they developed an overall strategic theme: fly to win, work together, and work smart. Their strategic intent was very clear and direct. Anybody could understand it. Return to profitability in 1995, that's 1 year, and run an airline we could be proud of. Every single employee could easily understand what our vision was. And they also had two very important strategic imperatives that had to be implemented for them to deliver on their vision. Number one, obviously, they had to become liquid. They had to get their cash flow going in the right direction. And number two, they had to build a performance culture where the productivity of every employee made a difference and helped move the company forward. Without these two things, they could not deliver on their strategy. Now, this, however, is where most companies tend to end, in defining the vision and then hoping somehow the functions are going to work it out and figure out how to deliver. And what they're delivering is what we call the enterprise metrics. These are the bankable numbers that you go at the end of the year with: orders, cash, sales, EBIT, the very important real numbers. The real question is, how are you going to get there? How are we going to get from vision to results? Effective strategy delivery or strategy execution requires not a silo focus like I mentioned earlier, but instead a horizontal focus, which helps overcome that dysfunctional silo focus we spoke of, and is the most effective way when laid out in several different, what I call, strategic work streams. Effective strategy delivery requires a horizontal focus, and these strategy work streams are best when they are in a balanced format, dealing with important elements such as culture, customers, products, and costs. You can see how these begin to form horizontal strategic work streams. And within these become the actions required to turn our vision into results. So these actions and activities form a joined up line of sight. We begin with breakthrough objectives. They then require strategic initiatives or projects or programs in order to be delivered. And then strategic KPIs, key performance indicators. So let's look at the definitions of some of these very, very quickly. Breakthrough objectives. These are the critical few big objectives that, if achieved, will help us deliver on our strategic vision. The initiatives are projects, initiatives, programs, which are each supported by plans, cost-benefit assessments, root cause analysis, accountabilities, and in-state metrics and milestones. And the key performance indicators is how we will then track performance, track the performance against plan of our breakthrough objectives. If we go back to our Continental Airlines example again, these are the 9 breakthrough objectives that they came up with in order to deliver on their strategic intent. As you remember, their strategic intent was to become profitable in 1995, that's 1 year, and build an airline we can all be proud of. They broke it up into 4 strategic horizontal work streams: culture, customers, products, and costs. And you can see the large breakthrough objectives within each of these work streams. In terms of the customers, enhance relationships with the travel agents. In terms of the product, improve the image of the fleet, perform in the top 50% of the industry. In terms of costs, secure liquidity, restructure the fleet, so on and so on. And these 9 breakthrough objectives then spawned 27 strategic initiatives and an overall progress was measured by 9 KPIs. So quickly, going from strategic building blocks through the strategic theme, intent, and imperatives, you can easily get to your line of sight strategy on a page. Here's the Continental example if you are interested. Again, 9 breakthrough objectives, spawns 27 strategic initiatives, each with an accountable executive assigned to it. The whole process was measured by 9 key performance indicators, resulting in the delivery of their enterprise metrics. In this case, it was profitability and cash flow. And after the strategy roadmap tracks performance, you can also see that it turns into a performance dashboard as well with the traffic light system. So very quickly, just by scanning this line of sight strategy on a page, you can easily see which initiatives the senior team needs to pay most attention to, which problems need to be solved quickly in order for the entire strategy to continue to move forward. The traffic light system is much like a normal traffic light where green is on track, amber is there's a warning, and red we're off track. So the whole purpose of this building a robust line of sight strategy execution roadmap is very simple. It's to go from this, the 300-page strategy document that normally winds up on the shelf, to a manageable dashboard and strategic roadmap. Now, the real power of this as a business process and a management tool lies beneath the line of sight one-pager. Beneath the one-page visual of our strategy execution roadmap lies all the data required to effectively manage the strategy. In other words, you can attach it to company databases, Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, PowerPoint presentations, and all other kinds of information required to understand the current situation going on within your strategic initiatives. And the map can be accessed on multiple platforms, including computer and TV screens, iPads, mobile devices. In other words, we now have a living strategy that we can use to effectively manage the progress of the company going forward. And all the data required to make decisions, solve business problems, overcome stalled initiatives is easily accessible by clicking on any one of the active cells on the strategy roadmap. You can quickly uncover the information required to make good business decisions. Once you've developed your strategy execution roadmap, it's then used in a frequent governance process so that the senior team is always clear on the current state of the strategy and the initiatives. We recommend that at least monthly the senior team get together in what we call a strategy review meeting. And they review in this 3 to 4 hour meeting. It's only focused on the strategy. It's not operational issues, chaired by the chief executive. It's got a focused format. We work the issues as a team, and we keep the discipline on solving the issues that are currently blocking the development of our strategy. It's not unusual for a senior team who is facing significant competitive challenges to hold this strategy review meeting every 2 weeks. And in fact, in the case of the Ford Global Turnaround, which has recently been conducted, they had their strategy review meeting every single week because it was that important that they execute and deliver on their Save the Company strategy. This line of sight visual tool is also a great communication device as well. The board of directors often needs to know on a monthly basis what's going on inside the company. Rather than reading a 300-page board document, they can now have access to a simple one-page, plan on a page, and can ask the right questions. Why is this red? how do we get this happening faster? What decisions do we need to make? It's also an excellent tool for employee communications. And if you have outside investors who want to know what's happening in the country, it's an excellent tool as well. Let me just talk for a minute about this as an employee communication and engagement tool. The line of sight roadmap often forms a central part of executive briefings with employees. You can walk through from vision to breakthrough objectives to initiatives to KPIs to enterprise metrics and see how every part of the organization is performing. It is also extremely useful in performance improvement workshops and meetings with employees where they can get down and discuss those initiatives that are most directly related to their function or their department. Let me summarize now with some of the benefits I think that a robust strategy execution process gives to a company. And these are just a few. It is a disciplined management process that allows us to focus our time and energy well. It allows us to quickly respond to market shifts, and by that I mean if there's a sudden change in the market, like happened in the global meltdown in 2008 on the economic front, you don't have to revise your entire strategy. With the line of sight roadmap, you can just go to whatever line item is most effective and work on those. You don't have to rebuild your strategy from the bottom up. It gives you monthly updates. In fact, it's possible to embed videos into this line of sight template as well, so you can show updates. It's very clear on accountabilities and metrics. Again, what I spoke about earlier is one of the barriers to why most strategies fail is it's not clear on who's working with such a business process really creates an open culture. The employees know what's going on. There's total transparency. It's clear who needs help and how, and it becomes more open dialogue and more conversation goes on around solving problems. It certainly is a very easy visual connected story that employees can easily understand. And one hidden benefit, it does build confidence in the company and its leadership. Once displayed to employees, it shows very clearly that we know where we're going, we know where we're going to wind up, we know how we're going to get there, we know every part that every function and everybody plays. So I'm going to end with how I started, and that is what I think you're going to gain from this webinar. I think we have a good understanding of why most strategies fail. I think we now understand the strategy is not just the analytics, but it must include action and execution. I think we've got a pretty good understanding of the barriers to effective strategy execution. And there is an integrated, effective roadmap solution. And it's very important we understand the role of the leadership team in leading this with the monthly or bi-monthly strategy review meetings. Now, where to go for more? If you're curious and you're interested in learning more, there's a recent book that has just been published. It's called FASTBREAK, The CEO's Guide to Strategy Execution. It's available in paperback on Amazon in both the UK and Amazon.com. It's also available as a Kindle ebook on Amazon Kindle. Or if you're really curious and you want to talk more, feel free to contact me directly through my email. Okay, I'm going to stop now. I think we've gone through quite a bit of information. I'm very curious about your questions and am willing and eager to respond to those. Ali, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, John, for a very comprehensive presentation. Quite an intriguing one. Folks, if you have any questions, you could either raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the webinar console. If you click on it, I'll give you an opportunity to speak to him. Or you could put your questions in the question box. I noticed there are already a few questions posted in the question box, so I can start taking them over. In the meanwhile, you can raise your hand for me to let you speak to him directly as well. There's a question from Brother Tariq Salim. The question, in strategy execution, what is the role of contingency planning? Is it necessary or not? And are there any approaches, templates you can recommend for it?
I think that's a very good question. Let me respond this way. If we look at the strategy building blocks, one of those could easily be scenario planning or contingency planning, and in fact it should be. One nice thing about a process or a business process like this is once you develop those contingencies or scenarios, you load them into this framework and they're there for review whenever the opportunity or the problem arises. You can quickly click on the box, go to them, gather a group together, and discuss. So I think contingency planning is extremely important. The world is moving very fast, and things aren't going to stay the same, and we must put scenario contingency planning into our strategy building blocks.
Okay, thank you. Let me move for an audio question. We have Daryl Chapman. Daryl, if you can hear me, I've just unmuted you. Could you please introduce yourself and ask the question? Daryl Chapman, can you hear us? You raised your hand. I guess we're having some audio issue with Daryl, so let me move to the next caller. We had Mr. Brother Abrar Zafar. You raised your hand, sir. Could you please introduce yourself and ask the question? Abrar. Hello? Abrar, can you hear us? Abrar? Okay. Sorry about that. Let me move to the next one. We had, okay, Mr. Brother Khalid Bawazir, can you hear us? And could you please introduce yourself and ask a question?
Yes. I have it's like a comment indeed. I concluded from this presentation that the culture is one of the most important factors to build our strategy.
So let me repeat, you found it quite comprehensive in terms of putting up or implementing the strategy?
The culture, because he mentioned, Mr. John, that the culture is one of the most effective factors when you implement the strategy. Indeed, from my experience also, I found that this is one of the main factors we have to consider when we implement the strategy.
Okay, so I guess, John, he is highlighting the aspect of the culture, which you highlighted as well, as an important factor.
Yeah, let me comment on that if I can, because I think it's important for everybody to realize. The problem with culture, as I'm sure that the professor who spoke realizes, is that most cultures are invisible to those inside the organization. In other words, they can't see the strengths and weaknesses of their culture. So they tend to run up against cultural barriers that they cannot see because it's called cultural familiarity or cultural blindness. And so getting a good understanding of your own culture's strengths and weaknesses, especially when it comes to important issues like strategy and execution and change, is critical in being able to deliver on any kind of a change or strategic initiative.
Okay, thank you. Let me move to the next caller. We have Brother Naveed Khwaja. Could you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yes, thanks, Ali. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please, you can introduce yourself.
So this is Naveed Khwaja from England. I run a management consultancy focusing on culture change management. And thank you very much for a very nice and informative presentation, Brother John. The question is, are we trying to reinvent the wheel here? Because I can see all the things that you're mentioning here are from the balanced scorecard engine. You talk about the objectives, the strategy on a page, and the line in sight, and initiatives. All of that is part of the balanced scorecard already. So am I missing something here, or is it something in parallel that you're trying to develop?
Ali, are you there? Are you going to?
Yeah, John, did you hear the question?
Yeah. Yes, I did. I heard it very clearly. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, could you answer it, sir?
Certainly. I think it's a very good question. There are lots of similarities, and so I want to point out that this is not a substitute necessarily for the balanced scorecard. In fact, this builds off of the balanced scorecard, and I think adds a dimension that's not fully represented in the way the balanced scorecard is currently executed in most places, and that is making sure that the senior team is aligned, because the first part of this process is aligning the senior team and getting them into a place where they look at the organization horizontally and not vertically. So that's one, I think, very important difference. I think the other important difference is the use of this as a management tool on a regular governance basis rather than just as an executive roadmap. So I don't think it actually takes the good foundation that was done by Kaplan and Norton on the balanced scorecard, and I think it takes it just a little bit further.
Okay, so Naveed, you have a supplementary?
Okay, so so if I understand it correctly now, then balanced scorecard has its own cogs that move the engine of the overall system, and the KPIs and the targets and initiatives work in a specific way. So what you're saying is you've come up with the way to execute a balanced scorecard well and produce more clear results and more engagement with the leadership team.
Very well said. Thank you very much. I think you should be giving this webinar.
No, thank you very much. I just wanted to answer. No, that's good. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Naveed. Okay, for your question, and let me move to a next caller. We have Brother Tariq Salim. If you can hear me, could you please introduce yourself and where you're calling from and ask a question to the speaker?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Yeah, my name is Tariq Salim. I'm professor and in the School of Business, professor of economics in the School of Business at the American University in Cairo, Egypt. My question, first of all, it's a great talk. I really benefited personally from this, and I think that there is a new value-added contribution. I would like to ask a more holistic question. Can such FASTBREAK approach be implemented in more of public sectors, institutions, rather than private businesses? Can the model be tailored towards institutional performance or public institutional performance? Because in my country, that's a high priority for economic development, which leads to business development anyway.
Of course. Good. Okay, if I can speak?
Yes.
First of all, let me say thank you for your question, and let me just throw in a tidbit. I went to the American University of Beirut a long time ago, so perhaps we have a little bit in common there. Second of all, I think your question is very good, and I would say absolutely. In fact, in public institutions or where there are more stakeholders than just the employees and the stockholders. And in public and government institutions, you've got a lot of different stakeholders who must be communicated with well and frequently, and they must have a good understanding of what the organization is trying to accomplish, what the journey is they're going on, how they're progressing, where some of the problems are. And a simple visual framework like this, with an aligned leadership team fully supportive, gives us a great ability to communicate clearly with all the various stakeholders that are required in government or public institutions. That make sense?
Yeah, sure.
So I guess, can we move to the next question, Tariq? Or?
Well, if I can have a follow-up comment.
Sure.
So you're talking about strategy, implementation, strategy, execution. And you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation about accountability,
Yes.
making sure that there is accountability, because if we are all accountable, then no one is accountable. Can you elaborate on how to make effectively on the ground someone more accountable, especially in also in public institutions?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Let me start with one of the benefits of a process like this, and I think the balanced scorecard is similar, is that you begin to get a lot more transparency in an organization than you've ever had before. I've been in many organizations where information tends to be locked up inside of departments or functions. And when information becomes power, people protect their information. And without that transparency, without everybody understanding the issues and the information required, it's very difficult to get anything accomplished. And so a process like this makes all the information transparent and available. So when you have an accountable executive, in other words, in the development of this line of sight roadmap, when you get the strategic initiatives articulated, a senior executive is assigned to own that initiative, and it's not as a sponsor or chairperson. It's really they are the accountable owner, and they recruit a team, and they must deliver on that. And every 2 weeks or every month, they have to report on the progress. And everything's available. All the information is available to the whole senior team. So what happens in these kinds of situations is that peer pressure tends to take over. People don't want to look bad in front of their peers. People don't want to let the team down. And so accountability, which is inherent in all of us, because there's transparency, there's open dialogue, people tend to be more forthright and tend to deliver better on their projects than if they were hidden behind those walls of functions or departments. So I think there's a natural inherent accountability in people, and a transparent, open process like this tends to bring it out. And people can challenge each other in a constructive way. And I think you get the best out of people when there's openness and transparency than when there's secrecy and hidden information.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. Very good question, by the way. Next.
Thank you very much, Tariq. Let me quickly move to another caller. We have another raised hand. Brother Mahmoud Sharaf, could you introduce yourself, sir, and ask the question? I've just unmuted you.
That was very nice. Thank you.
Sorry.
I would like to...
Yes, please go ahead, sister.
Yes, I would like to have the presentation. Would you send me the presentation, please?
Oh, okay, sister. Yes, we will send you the presentations. In fact, we will be uploading on our community, which I'll just demonstrate in a short while. But do you have any questions which you'd like to ask to the speaker?
No, no.
Okay, thank you very
I
much.
don't have any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sister. So let me move to the question box. We have a question from Alan Meekings. Alan is asking, you mentioned the need to avoid day-to-day pressures distracting the top-level executive team from strategy execution. Any further thoughts on this?
Well, as I mentioned in the barriers, I think that's one of the big barriers to why strategies fail, is that too often strategy meetings turn into problem solving on day-to-day operations. And usually, because most strategy review meetings are only every quarter, in other words, every 3 months, there's not a cadence or a governance or a discipline that is sort of ingrained in the group, and so it's easy to get off track. It's very important to develop a governance process and a discipline in moving your strategy forward. Is also the role of the chief executive. This is where they lead the strategy review meetings and making certain that operational issues are talked about in other meetings, not the strategy review meeting. It's really about, are the strategic initiatives moving forward, and if not, what do we need to do to move them forward? So there's a discipline and a leadership element required. Thank you, Alan.
Well, thank you very much, John, for the answer. So folks, that sort of brings us towards the end of the webinar. With that, I would like to thank you, Mr. Childress, for a very, very informative presentation that you've given. Apparently, there has been quite an interest in terms of getting even the soft copy of the presentation, which we will coordinate and upload on our MAL community. However, once again, I would like to thank you on MAL's behalf for taking the time and giving this presentation via webinar. And thank
You're
you.
welcome.
And any concluding remarks you would like to give?
Well, I would just encourage anybody, if they want to talk further, I'm available. We can chat on email or any other way. And again, thank you for taking your time. This process has been proven to be very, very, very effective, so I hope that you will look into it further.
Certainly, certainly, and we would like to keep in touch with you, and we would like to invite you, as we had discussed earlier, on the MAL community, and I will be coordinating with you separately, Mr. Childress. And folks, you must be seeing on your screen, this is community.mal.org on the webinar, so stay tuned. We are having quite a busy month. In the month of June, we have a number of webinars that are already scheduled and upcoming. The webinars which are being done are also in the archive section, so you can actually see the archived versions, download the soft copy of the presentations, and actually even download the audio versions, which is in the process of transformation right now. And feel free to join this community and MAL to interact and participate in various community groups on emotional intelligence to corporate governance to media and communications, etc., etc. And with that, I would like to conclude and thank you once again to Mr. Childress for your presentation and all of those who participated in this webinar. I am going to end this webinar now, so you will all be automatically dismissed out. Thank you very much once again.